The bell over the cafe door jingled like it always did, but today it felt different. She was there, sitting at the corner table by the window, the one with the cracked leather chair. I almost didn't recognize her at first. Her hair caught the morning light in a way that made every strand feel deliberate, every movement measured. She glanced up, and for a moment our eyes met. A tiny hesitation, like she wasn't sure if I was supposed to be there. "I didn't think you'd be in before 9, she said, not looking away from her mug. The steam curled up, soft and insistent, like the pause in her voice. Usually I come later," I said, tugging at the corner of my sleeve. My words felt too loud in the quiet room. She smirked, the kind that's mostly private, almost apologetic, as if she knew she was sharing something I wasn't supposed to understand. "You remember black coffee? No sugar." I flicked my eyes toward her hands, wrapped around the mug like it was fragile. I did remember. And the thought made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. She could read me like a paused book, and I liked it, even if it scared me. We didn't talk much after that. I folded and refolded the napkin in front of me, noticing the way the corners lined up in perfect angles, trying not to notice her watching me do it. She tapped her fingers lightly on the table, 1, 2, 3, slow enough to seem accidental. I wondered if she was counting something, days, or maybe minutes until I left. The cafe smelled like wet concrete outside, coffee beans, and the faintest hint of cinnamon. I liked that it was ordinary. Ordinary was safe. Ordinary was easy. But then she leaned back slightly, her voice soft. "If anyone sees us, we're done." The words weren't loud, but they landed heavier than the mugs clinking behind her. My throat felt suddenly dry. "Then, let's stay hidden," I replied, almost without thinking. She laughed then, quietly, the sound sliding through the space between us. A shared joke, a secret, a promise. I caught it in my chest and held it there. I realized I'd been staring. Not in a creepy way, well, maybe, but just noticing the curve of her smile, the way her eyes softened when she looked at nothing in particular. She shifted in her seat, a subtle adjustment, and I imagined her doing that often, absent-mindedly, when no one was watching. My phone buzzed on the table, ignored for a moment. An unsent text I had written yesterday, now deleted, was still lingering in my head. I often paused mid-typing, wondering if I should send a word I wasn't ready to speak. My solitude felt quieter with her here, paradoxically. She packed her bag slowly, zipper scraping against the leather like a faint exclamation. She looked up at me, a small tilt of her head that asked more than she said. I cleared my throat, trying to make it casual. "See you tomorrow?" She didn't answer right away. Just a long look, heavy in a way that made me want to ask too many questions and also none at all. Then she whispered, "If anyone notices, we're gone. But I'll see you." And just like that, she was gone, leaving the space she had occupied humming in the air. I sat there for another 10 minutes, stirring cold coffee and pretending to read a book. My hand brushed the napkin, still folded, edges crisp. And I knew, somehow, that nothing would feel ordinary again. The next morning, the mailbox was half full of flyers, bills, and one plain envelope addressed to me in her handwriting. I held it for longer than necessary, tracing the letters with a thumb, as if memorizing the curve of each line would explain the way she made me feel. Inside was just a folded note. "T 4 p.m. my place. Don't be late." I arrived earlier, pretending to tidy the small garden she kept by the window, even though I knew she wouldn't notice. She did, eventually. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me kneel in the dirt. "You do that well," she said, and I laughed, brushing soil off my hands. "Or maybe you just like making me look clumsy." She shook her head, that subtle smile again, and something in her expression hinted at a memory I wasn't allowed to reach. "I used to have a garden when I was your age," she said, voice low, almost confessional. "My mom, she liked tulips. I killed more than I saved." She chuckled softly, as if the guilt still lingered, tucked under the edges of her words. I stayed silent, kneeling awkwardly, noticing the way the light hit her hair, catching little flecks of gray. The age difference, so obvious now, made me hesitate, though I couldn't look away. It was there in the spaces between her words, in the crease of her brow, in the softness around her eyes. She was divorced, I knew, and the idea of being noticed in the wrong way, by neighbors, by the world, loomed quietly over us. When we moved inside, she offered tea. I accepted, fumbling slightly as I poured water from the kettle. She watched, tilting her head. "You always notice the small things," she said. I shrugged. "I notice when someone does, too." We sat at her kitchen table, sunlight brushing across the counter, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. The quiet wasn't empty, it was heavy with the possibility of words we weren't allowed to say. I imagined scenarios I would never act on, sitting too close, brushing hands accidentally, leaning into conversations that were too personal. I forced myself to fold my hands over the mug, to look down at the swirls of steam. She reached for the sugar jar, fingers brushing mine. I froze, not out of shock, but because it meant something, and I couldn't name it. Her eyes met mine, steady, almost staring, and then she pulled her hand back as if nothing had happened. "I shouldn't," she said softly, not finishing the sentence. I nodded, though I knew she didn't need my consent. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. Not the ordinary me, the quiet neighbor who left unsent texts, but me, exactly as I was, clumsy in the garden, fumbling with tea, sitting still enough to be noticed. When she laughed, small and breathless, I felt the tension in my chest loosen just slightly. She rested her hand briefly on the table near mine, not touching, but close enough that the warmth seemed to linger. And as I walked home later, I realized I was carrying the weight of a shared silence that meant more than any words could. I didn't see her for 2 days. The mailbox was empty, the cafe quiet. When I finally caught her in the hallway outside my building, she was balancing grocery bags and a stack of letters. Her face brightened just slightly, enough to make me stumble over my own greeting. "Hey," I said, trying for casual. "Hey," she replied, voice soft. Her hands shifted the bags, and I noticed the small tremor in her fingers. I realized, suddenly, that she was holding herself together in a way that demanded observation, demanded care. We walked toward the elevator, the silence stretching longer than it should. I wanted to ask if she'd been thinking about me, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, I fiddled with the zipper on my jacket, fingers brushing the metal like it could anchor me. I started reading that book you mentioned," I said finally. "The one about don't," she interrupted gently, glancing away. "I don't want to talk about it." Her eyes flicked toward mine, then away, a subtle pullback, and I realized how quickly the closeness could unravel. I swallowed. "Okay." The elevator doors dinged open on the 5th floor, and a neighbor stepped in, glancing at her groceries. She tensed. I felt the shift in her posture, the careful way she positioned the bags between us. I wanted to tell her it was fine, that no one cared, but even I hesitated. We stood shoulder to shoulder, close enough that the heat of her arm brushed mine. I wanted to lean into it, to say something, anything, that would reach past her walls. Instead, I pressed my hands into my pockets, pretending to study the floor numbers. She paused by her door, one key dangling between her fingers. She started, then stopped. The unfinished sentence hung in the air. I took a step closer. "You don't have to." Her hand grazed mine, accidental or deliberate, I couldn't tell. My chest tightened. The world outside the hallway didn't exist. Only the brush of skin, the almost there warmth. A laugh from the neighbor down the hall startled us both. She pulled back, letting the key slide into the lock with a quick snap. I wanted to reach for her, to ask if we could pause the world for just 1 second longer. She turned to me, eyes searching, unspoken. I saw hesitation, self-doubt, a question she didn't trust herself to voice. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. I thought about leaning in, just a fraction closer, to see if the moment could hold us. But her hand moved, adjusting the bag at her side, and the motion dissolved the space we'd almost breached. My heart still thudded in that silence, an echo of everything we hadn't said, everything I wanted to. She smiled faintly, almost apologetically. "See you later," she whispered. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah. Later." And as the door closed behind her, the hallway suddenly felt empty, too large. I rubbed the back of my neck, replaying the near touch, the unfinished sentences, the warmth that lingered despite the distance. I realized I was holding on to a second that had never fully existed, but it had. I found her on the park bench, the one under the oak that had lost most of its leaves. She was watching a group of children chase a stray dog, lips pressed together like she was trying not to laugh out loud. I hesitated at the edge of the path, unsure if I was allowed to step closer. "Hey," I said finally, voice small. She looked up, startled, and then relaxed. "Hey," she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her scarf smelled faintly of the coffee we shared the other day. We sat side by side, either of us speaking for a while. The leaves rustled between us, and I noticed how often she glanced at my hands, as if trying to read what I might do next. "I saw you yesterday with him," she said suddenly, and my stomach sank. Not a full sentence, just enough to pull a knot tight in my chest. "Oh," I said. Pause. "Yeah." I didn't know how much to admit. The words felt heavy, too heavy for a bench and falling leaves. She twisted her fingers in her scarf. "I didn't like it," she admitted, voice low. "Seeing you, with someone else." Her eyes flicked down, then back at me. "It's stupid. I shouldn't feel that way." I wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her it wasn't stupid, that it made me feel alive, that she cared, even a little. But I stayed still, letting the air between us swell with unspoken truths. I think I'm scared," she continued, almost in a whisper. "Scared of losing control, or maybe losing you. I don't know." I swallowed. Her confession hung there, delicate and dangerous. The calm of the park made the words sharper somehow, like they didn't belong outside, like they were meant for a private world that only existed between us. "I don't know what to do with that," I admitted, voice raw, almost breaking. I don't want to mess anything up." She shifted closer, just enough that the tip of her elbow brushed mine. I could feel her warmth, quiet and deliberate. She didn't pull away. The bench felt smaller, the space between us impossibly narrow. "I don't want anyone else seeing us," she said softly, almost a repeat, almost a mantra. I nodded because I understood. The words weren't about secrecy. They were about permission, about fear, about the fragile thread holding us together. For a moment, I imagined leaning in, just a fraction, letting the rest of the world disappear. But she tilted her head slightly, like she was waiting, testing, seeing if I would cross the line. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the path. She exhaled slowly, and I realized she had said more than she realized. Her hands trembled faintly as she folded them in her lap. And then she asked, or maybe just thought, the question that lingered in the space between us. "If anyone knew, would it all be gone?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. I only felt the weight of the pause, the possibility, and the ache of wanting more while knowing it could all vanish in a heartbeat. She didn't answer my texts for 3 days. Not even a quick, "I'm busy." The silence was sharp, like someone had pulled the plug on a room I thought we shared. I found myself walking past her building more than usual, hoping to catch her at the mailbox, on the stairs, anywhere. But the hallway stayed empty, quiet except for the distant hum of an elevator. When I finally saw her, it was through the cafe window. She sat alone, a notebook open, pen poised but not moving. She looked different. More distant, as if the air between us had turned colder overnight. I debated whether to go in. My stomach churned, but I stayed outside, pretending to check my phone. Later, she appeared at my door carrying a grocery bag. She hesitated on the threshold, fingers brushing the edge of the frame like she needed support. She started, then stopped. Her eyes flicked past me, toward the street. It's complicated, she said finally. I wanted to ask what she meant. I wanted to tell her it was fine, that I could wait, that I understood. But the words wouldn't come. I only nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Over the next few days, our routines fractured. She returned calls with a pause that felt like miles, stopped sharing the small jokes, the knowing looks, the warmth that had pulled me in. I caught glimpses of her, eyes darting away as if I weren't allowed to exist in the same frame. Then I learned something I hadn't known: she had a child. Not a detail I'd imagined, but a presence that shifted everything quietly, without drama. I didn't hear it from her. A mutual acquaintance mentioned it casually, and my stomach sank in that small, precise way that announces life has tilted. I pictured her juggling afternoons, homework, the weight of responsibility I hadn't counted on. And me, a foolish interloper, treading too close. I tried to reach her. Drafted messages, deleted them, rewrote them, paused mid-typing. Words felt inadequate, too crude for the subtle fractures forming between us. Some nights I imagined her walking past, smiling faintly, a single glance enough to undo the walls I'd built. Other nights I imagined her stepping aside, closing the door, leaving me alone. One evening, I walked past the park bench where we'd shared our near confession. The seat was empty, leaves scattered across the worn wood. I stood there, hands in my pockets, the wind tugging at my jacket. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. Her shadow passed in the distance. She didn't see me. I didn't call out. I didn't move. The moment passed, brief and hollow, leaving only the echo of what could have been. Back at my apartment, my phone buzzed with a draft message I never sent. I don't know what to do. I stared at the words, deleted them, left the blank screen blinking. And that night, the bed felt too large, the room too quiet. The spaces she used to occupy, coffee, laughter, the brush of her hand, were absent. I waited, but not for her. I waited for something I couldn't name. I found her in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound besides the faint tapping of rain against the window. She was chopping vegetables, methodical, lost in the rhythm, and I lingered in the doorway, unsure if I had permission to exist in this small, ordinary space. "Hey," I said softly. She didn't startle, just paused, knife hovering, and gave me a small nod. I stepped closer, hands shoved into my pockets, aware of the quiet between us. I wanted to ask 100 things, confess 100 fears, but all I could manage was, I miss this. Us. Her knife hit the cutting board again, steady. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," she said, voice low. She didn't look at me, only at the vegetables, only at the task she'd chosen to anchor herself. I shifted my weight. "I wasn't sure I would either." Pause. "I guess. I just needed to see if you'd let me." Her hand trembled slightly as she set the knife down. Finally, she turned toward me, eyes careful but open. "I didn't know if it was fair. Or safe. For either of us." I nodded, stepping closer. The air smelled faintly of onions and rain, the ordinary domesticity of her apartment grounding the storm I'd carried these last days. "I know," I said. "But I had to know anyway." We sat at the small kitchen table, neither touching, but close enough that our knees brushed under the surface. I noticed the slight hesitation in her movements, the way she wrapped her hands around her mug, as if drawing warmth from it, and I wanted to bridge that careful space without frightening her. "I wasn't just keeping away from you," she admitted, voice small. "I was keeping away from everything. From feeling anything too much. I didn't want to lose control." I exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. "I get that," I said, though I didn't know if I fully did. I didn't want to stop being here, even if it was messy." She met my eyes then, steady now, with that faint glimmer of trust she hadn't allowed before. And I realized we were both weighing the same risk, speaking, moving closer, being seen, being hurt. A pause stretched long enough to hold a heartbeat. Then she reached across the table, just the tip of her fingers brushing mine. The touch wasn't dramatic, wasn't cinematic, it was small, human, enough. Enough to say, I'm here. I'm letting you in. I held her gaze, and all the tension of the past week condensed into that simple contact. The kitchen smelled of vegetables and rain and something fleeting but certain, connection. She let go first, a soft smile playing at her lips. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I echoed. And for the first time in days, the pause lifted. We didn't need more than that, no grand gestures, no promises, just acknowledgement, proximity, and the fragile, careful start of something real. Weeks passed in the quiet way that only routines allow. I found her again on the park bench, the one under the oak with the scattered leaves. It was 8:47 a.m., precisely the time I had started noticing small, unimportant details. The way the sunlight hit the cracks in the wood, the faint scuff on her shoes, the half-drained coffee in her thermos. She waved without words, and I waved back, smiling at the familiarity of it. Our mornings became small rituals. Black coffee shared across chipped mugs, an occasional remark about the weather, laughter at nothing at all. Not every day was effortless, not every moment free from doubt. But we learned the language of careful presence, the unspoken cues, the comfort in each other's pauses. One afternoon, we returned to the bench after errands, carrying a thin grocery bag between us. She handed me a small tulip bulb. "You killed more than you saved last time," she teased softly, eyes flicking up to mine. I laughed, brushing my hand over hers briefly as I took it, feeling the warmth linger longer than it had any right to. We spoke of little things, a book she'd read, a song she couldn't get out of her head, the neighbor who always watered his plants too early. The world remained ordinary, but ordinary became enough. There was no grand confession, no dramatic declaration, just presence, small acts that mattered because they were consistent, because they were ours. I realized one evening, sitting at her kitchen table while she stirred sugar into her tea and I sipped black coffee, that my unsent texts, my paused thoughts, my imagined scenarios, they had become markers of a past self. I didn't need them anymore. We had found a quiet, steady understanding, a gentle intimacy that demanded nothing flashy, only honesty. Sometimes she would glance at the park bench, and I would catch her thinking of that near confession, that hesitant touch that had almost shattered us. We didn't need to speak of it. The memory was ours, safe between us. A small nod, a smile, a shared sip of coffee, these became the punctuation of our story. One Sunday, she looked out the window, watching the rain scatter over the pavement. "Remember when we first met?" she said, voice almost lost in the patter. I nodded. "I do," I whispered. "It feels different now." "Yeah," she replied. Her hand found mine, not deliberately, but naturally, as if we'd always been there, leaning into each other's lives in small, unassuming ways. And for a moment, I realized how ordinary life could be extraordinary. The stolen glances, the quiet gestures, the shared silences, they were ours, perfect in their imperfection. I leaned back, letting the warmth of the coffee seep into my palms, and thought, some things don't need words. They just need time. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?